So the big idea for the morning, Dave has this great series going through the book of James called More Than Words. And this morning we have a really simple goal. He assigned me this stunning passage, like just this perfect passage. And we get to just go through it. There's no blanks to fill in. There's none of the alliteration I usually like. There's no video. There's no outline. There's nothing. There's just these verses from James, which is why James is so great. We've been studying it in the youth group on Tuesdays for this whole last year because when I was a young Christian trying to figure out what it meant to be a Christian, how to live as a Christian and survive as a Christian, I needed a place in the Bible where it didn't just tell me what to believe, but how to live. And that's what's so great about James is it doesn't just tell us about God and about Jesus, it tells us about ourselves. So the students are here. So if you've never been here on a service before where I'm preaching and the students are here, you should be ready. It gets a little crazy. You guys, these have words on them, these balls. And if you hear me say these words, you get to throw the balls at me, okay? You guys back there? Hear me? Okay, good. If you hear me say these words, you can throw these balls at me. So everybody else, just get your helmets on. And in case any of you are falling asleep, I've got a fair amount of candy up here too. So watch yourself. There's candy flying towards everybody. Sorry, innocent bystander. There's just, that'll happen again. If I see you guys falling asleep or anything, and if you're falling, just raise your hand, I'll throw you a Zot. You can't sleep through Zots. There's no way. The Post-it note was just my list of the words so that I am ready for when they're going to throw balls at me. But I'm fairly certain I'll forget. Logan Ainsworth is going to come up right now and read James chapter 1, verses 19 to 27 for us. So Logan, where you at? Come on up. Everybody else, the words will be up here. Please follow along. James chapter 1, verses 19 to 27. Ready? Yeah. Do it.
My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in the mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting that what they have heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. Those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress and keep oneself from being polluted by the world.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thanks. Good. You can bring it back to them. Okay, so we're just going to jump right in because I want to make sure that we have time to get through all this and look at these verses. It starts right away. James 1:19 says, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. This is great because this is not just advice for Christians. This is just good advice for life. You guys probably, like me, have had pretty entertaining times in your life with your family or at work where somebody has they just started talking way too fast. They got way ahead of their skis, and you thought that you wanted to throw them a rope, but you also want to see how far they dug themselves in before they stopped. We have to be really careful with this. There's several places in the Bible, including 4 in the book of Proverbs, that reinforce this. So here's some verses coming up from Proverbs that talk about why we're supposed to act this way. Proverbs 10:19 says, sin is not ended by multiplying words, but the prudent hold their tongues. Proverbs 13:3 says, those who guard their lips preserve their lives, but those who speak rashly will come to ruin. Proverbs 17:28, even fools are thought wise if they keep silent, and discerning if they hold their tongues. I got a new job recently, and it was one that I was ramping up, and I was put in some meetings before I fully understood it all. And I was really scared. I said to my boss that I was nervous about asking a dumb question. And I was expecting him to say what most nice people say, which is there's no such thing as a dumb question. And what he said was, you can't ask a dumb question if you don't ask questions. The idea was just don't say anything then you can kind of buy yourself some time to fake it until you learn it, and then you'll be fine afterwards. And maybe even people will think you're like so smart that you're being Yoda about it and keeping your words really careful or something like that. It was perfect. It was advice like just in the workplace as anything else. Proverbs 29:20 says, "Do you see someone who speaks in haste? There's more hope for a fool than for them." Those all make sense to us, right? And for me, this is one of those places, this verse, where it actually is even easier to understand if we think about it not just about ourselves and our relationship to other people, but if we think about it with our relationship to God. If we thought about it like this, everyone should be quick to listen to God, and everyone should be slow to speak to God, and everyone should be slow to get angry at God. Because sometimes the things that we're the best at, the things that come the quickest for us, are talking to God and blaming God for stuff. But it's hard for us to make the time to actually listen to God. Seriously, I'm over here. You've got to be able to do better than that. So when I was growing up in summer camp too, the way that we remembered this about being slow to being quick to listen, so to speak, was that we had 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? You guys can remember that. 2 ears, 1 mouth. It should be twice as easy for us to listen as for us to talk, even though it's often the opposite. And maybe you'll think about this too. Do any of you guys speak other languages? If you speak other languages, you might have had this example. This was one of my best assignments I ever had in high school. In high school, I loved taking German. There was this German teacher at our school. Her name was Elvira Stromberg. German, that's on my list. You almost got me. Her name was Elvira Stromberg. She was a tall German lady who wore like all black leather. She rode a motorcycle, and she also drove a Porsche that said the word Tschüss on the back, which is the German word for goodbye, because that's what she wanted people to read as she was speeding by them on the freeway. She taught 0-hour German, which at Hazen High School in Renton was at 6:20, which meant that I was walking to school, not with my Discman, but with my Walkman at like 5:30 in the morning to get to 0-hour German because I really liked German. The best assignment she ever gave us was, she told us that on this particular weekend, our junior year, there was going to be a bunch of cruise ships filled with Germans coming in to downtown Seattle and Vancouver, and she thought that we should go find Germans. She suggested Pike Place Market, go find Germans, and we should listen to them. And the further assignment was that we should annoy them and then listen and see what they said about us, which was not very hard for me to learn the words for, bald, short, annoying, American. So we did the whole thing where we hot glued a 50-cent piece to the sidewalk so that people would come by to pick it up. We had the corner of a $20 bill ripped off, glued into a wallet on a piece of fishing line. And and it wasn't hard to tell the German tourists, right? Pasty white, huge name tags from the cruise ship. It was like Dieter. Not hard to figure out it was. So we'd throw it out in front of Dieter and sit there with the fishing line and then wait till Dieter went to grab it and pull it back. And then we would just write down everything Dieter said about us. And it was glorious. A+ on that project. No problem. If you understand the language, everything, sometimes it's hard to speak it, and there's less power in speaking it than there is in understanding it. And this passage, I think it's really helpful for us. We don't always know what to say to God. But if we just are quiet for a minute and stop trying to say stuff to him and just listen to what he's saying to us, we'll find that it's this amazing thing. And we're hearing it just right because he's saying it in just the way that he needs us to. Also, we should pay attention to James when he reminds us to be slow to anger. You guys know this. People get mad quick, right? We have this whole, it's like really short fuse culture right now. I used to love this. I love my dad, Leonard, to death, but he used to do this thing. When we were in traffic, that was his shortest fuse. So we'd be in a country squire wagon, the big, the huge car, and a car would cut him off or do something. And so his idea was to roll the window down, but it didn't have power windows, so he had to crank the thing. And he always yelled the same thing as the car was at this point, a quarter mile ahead of us. "You idiotic nincompoop!" I have no idea why. I'll remember it forever. He used to do it all the time. Whatever the trigger is for you, there's places where we get mad quick. We get angry quick. And what we know for sure is that it doesn't help. It never helps. It usually has bad side effects. But that's not good enough for James. James always wants to give us the reason why we shouldn't do it. And so you see in this section look at James chapter 1, verse 20. It says, "Because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires." That's definitely not on the list. There is in us, there's this, God has a place for us to get to, and he has a way for us to get there. And if we let anger get in us, it gets us off track. We lose sight of the thing that we're supposed to do. Editorial note too about this, I've noticed, and you guys will have noticed this too right away. Being slow to anger doesn't mean acting nice in the face of something and then racing home to create like the perfect passive-aggressive Facebook post where the person knows what you're talking about and everybody else asks you about it so that you get to actually like throw gas on the fire. It's not that. That's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be able to put that anger through the filter of all of the compassion and mercy and grace that we've been shown and figure out a way to get past it. And also being slow to anger doesn't mean acting like you aren't mad and then racing and calling your best friend and like just burning their ear holes with all of your venom about how mad you are. That's also not the way Jesus would have done it, right? There's a better way for us to do it, and those things keep us from the righteousness that he has. So that's the main reason. Because you guys, think about this, students, and all of you guys, what do we get out of being angry? What does it accomplish? Not much, right? But this passage tells us what it keeps us from. It keeps us from the righteousness that God desires. The right living that God has for us doesn't happen if we let that get in our way. Okay, next part. Verse 21. It says, "Therefore get rid of all moral filth and the evil that's so prevalent among you, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you." This is interesting. The word that James uses for rid, I looked up a couple of these words just because I wanted to know, and it gets used a couple places in the Bible. One is it gets used to describe just taking off all of your clothes, and the other is it's used describing what happens when a snake loses its skin. It's saying that when you get rid of this, it's going to be a thing. It's going to take intentionality. For you to get rid of this from your life, it's going to be like a thing that other people notice. It's going to take some real work. And it's going to be noticeable, and it's going to be disorienting. But much of what we protect ourselves with, what we hide behind, is stuff that is potentially actually keeping us from the Father. Think about this. If there's something that defines you that's totally separate from your relationship with Jesus, whether it's good or bad, if there's just something that's a part of you that has nothing to do with your faith, there's no common denominator, then that's probably a thing that can keep you from Jesus. That's probably a thing that's keeping you from his best. And then the word James uses for filth is weird because it doesn't come up in the Bible anywhere else, but in books from the same period, it's used, this is really gross, but I'm just going to throw it out there. It's used to describe earwax. Good work. Earwax, right? No big deal. But if you think about this, if you just let that go, if you just never took care of it, you know first that it would make it really hard for you to hear. And then after that, you could also actually get sick from it. And then you know this maybe from just stuff, but it can also mess up your balance, right? It makes it difficult. Your equilibrium gets all messed up. And I think that's a helpful thing for me to think, because in the same way, when our life gets all clogged up with filth, with stuff, we can't hear God right, and we start to get sick, and our life's all out of balance. We lose our equilibrium. It makes it really hard for us to hear God. And then after that it says, "And humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you." And here it's really important for us to think about the word planted, because depending on what kind of church tradition you grew up in, or if you're brand new to church or something, that could be a weird thing. This is that time of year where if you planted stuff in your yard last year and forgot about it, it's coming up again. It's kind of a cool surprise. This passage is saying something about that there's this thing in you, and it's helpful for us to understand something about why. So one of the things it could mean that it's instinctive, that the word that you need to save you is in you, kind of like your conscience. And the best passage in the Bible, in my opinion, to focus on, to understand that, is Deuteronomy chapter 30. So if you look on the screen behind you, you can see it. This is a passage that hopefully you're familiar with, and this will just be a reminder. But if not, what you need to know is that Moses is speaking on behalf of God to the Israelites. They've already made one covenant with God earlier in Horeb, and this is the new covenant that they make at Moab. And to me, it's really powerful and impressive that, and it has to do with James, right? This is the choosing between life or death. So follow along. Here's Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 11 through 20. says, now what I am commanding you today is not too difficult for you or beyond your reach. It's not up in heaven that you have to ask, who will ascend into heaven to get it and proclaim it to us so that we may obey it? Nor is it beyond the sea so that you will have to ask, who will cross the sea to get it and proclaim it to us so we may obey it? No, the word's very near you. It's in your mouth and in your heart so you may obey it. See, I set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. For I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, and to keep his commands, decrees, and laws. Then you will live and increase, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land you are entering to possess. But if your heart turns away and you're not obedient, if you're drawn away to bow down to other gods and worship them, I declare to you this day that you will certainly be destroyed. You will not live long in the land you are crossing the Jordan to enter and possess. This day I call the heavens and earth as witness against you that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life, so that you and your children may live, and that you may love the Lord your God, listen to his voice, and hold fast to him. For the Lord is your life, and he will give you many years in the land he swore to give your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So you see there that planted could mean that we have a knowledge of how to live that's always guiding us and showing us how to obey it. Another option would be this parable that you know from Matthew chapter 13, the parable of the sower. It would be the other idea of planting could be that Jesus planted it in us. In that passage, it says that there's a farmer who's going out and he's throwing seed into the field, and it's landing in 4 different kinds of ground. A couple of them are totally incompatible. One of them is perfectly compatible, and one of them is all clogged up. And Jesus goes on, he explains that there are people who are totally closed to the Word of God, and there's people who don't understand it at all, or they grab it for a little bit and then they let it go. There's people who hold on to it for a second, but then so much of life, their big wax-filled ears of life, get in and mess it all up, and it dies. And there's other people who are able to pay attention to what Jesus is saying, to let the Word plant in them and have it change their life. Look too, if you have your Bibles, look at James chapter 1, verse 18. This is the verse right before the passage we're looking at today. It says, he chose to give us birth through the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of all he created. This is important. If you don't know this word first fruits, there's an Old Testament term of the things that were acceptable as sacrifices in the temple. And one of them was the first fruits of what you had planted, the first crop that comes up, the one that you're hungriest for, the one that you want to race to the market to make the most money on, the one that's going to be the best. It's the thing that you give to God in sacrifice. And this passage is saying, this is James, the brother of Jesus, saying, here's what my brother did. God sent him and put him in the ground for you guys. And he planted himself in you, and now you can be the first fruits of his sacrifice. And then we're called to do the same thing for the people around us who we love. Does that make sense? If we let it be planted in us, it doesn't just grow enough for us, it grows enough for everybody. It's like zucchini season when your neighbors are leaving it all in your mailbox. It's like that, where we didn't mean to get that much, but we do. Next passage. And this one, pay attention to it because it doesn't necessarily make sense right away. It's a little bit difficult. James chapter 1, verses 22 to 24. You see it there, and it says that... It says, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in the mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law, well, stop at verse 24. After looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. This is weird. I mean, it's clear. There's 2 people in here you don't want to be, right? The first one's pretty clear. The first person that's saying we don't want to be is the guy who goes to church and listens to everything and takes notes and knows the words and knows how to take communion and knows the names of all the people on the way in and has a parking spot, knows everything, but lives exactly the same as everyone else during the week, right? We're guilty of that sometimes. We understand that. But the mirror thing, does that make sense to you? The mirror thing's hard. I have this thing I do all the time that I find incredibly annoying. I want to know what time it is. I pull my phone out of my pocket with the intent of looking at the time, and I see a notification somebody liked my whatever, a World Cup score, some news alert, something like that. So I click that and I look at it and I get sucked into this whole world of like the interweb swirling all around me. And then at the end, I put my phone back in my pocket. And then my next thought after that is, what time is it? Like I had one job. They should make a thing where you can like look at your wrist and the time would be on it, because then I wouldn't get sucked into the interwebs and get all distracted. I do that all the time. But that's not really the mirror thing, right? It can't be that. It can't be that somebody goes to the mirror and looks and forgets what they look like. But it could be this. It could be, those points where you stand in the mirror and you see all the things you wish you could fix, but there's only so much you can do, and so you can't do anything, or you don't, right? There's this idea of a person going in front of a mirror and seeing that their hair's all messed up, and like they know their breath must be terrible. They've got a huge piece of pepper stuck right between their teeth, and like it's all a mess, and instead of doing anything about it, they just kind of throw on a hat and chew a piece of gum, and then they're out of there, that they just go away. And there's this idea that we do that too with our hearts, like with what we wish was different about ourselves. We look in the mirror of the Bible, the people we admire, the example of Jesus, and we see all the ways about us, all the things about us that we wish were different. We get overwhelmed by the idea of trying to fix it, and so instead of fixing it, we just cover it up. And I think that's part of what James is saying. He's saying that the word that's planted in us points at us not just who we are, but who we need to be. It lets us know where we're supposed to go next. It lets us know what Jesus hopes. And we don't want to have it be that we just basically wasted a bunch of time listening, but never doing anything about it. We want to make sure that like for us here as a church, one of the things that's really important is that we always keep our faith alive, so that it never just becomes about coming here every Sunday, but it becomes about all the things we do outside of here. James 1:25, the next verse, talks about the perfect law that gives freedom. And if you think about it, the ways that the law would be perfect, right? It's perfect because God gave it to us, and it's perfect because it can't be improved upon, but it's also perfect because it brings out perfection in us. So when we look at James 1:25, it says, whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they've heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. When I was reading this passage from the translation called The Message, this is the way verse 25 is read. It says, whoever catches a glimpse of the revealed counsel of God, the free life, even out of the corner of his eye, and sticks with it, is no distracted scatterbrain, but a man or woman of action. That person will find delight and affirmation in the action. And about this verse, this Bible commentator that I was reading named William Barclay, he says, so long as a man has to obey his own passions and emotions and desires, he's nothing less than a slave. It's when he accepts the will of God that he becomes really free, for then he's free to be what he ought to be. His service is perfect freedom, and in doing his will is our peace. The perfect law that gives freedom is the thing we see when we look in the mirror and we realize that it's only because the word that's planted in us that we can make sense of it. So then here is the last couple verses, the last two verses of this section that I want to focus on for a minute. It says, those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. The problem with this passage for me, like this is one of those verses, if you've heard this before, you've probably heard it used a bunch of different ways. When I was growing up, I grew up in a church where this verse, James 1:26, was completely about getting little boys to not say swear words. This is the verse that was like, this was on the wall in the room, and it was all about reminding us that one of the ways we got to be like Jesus was to make sure that we kept a tight rein on our tongue. There was a guy on a horse. It was a whole embarrassing thing. And so there's that, and there's the part about widows and orphans that we're going to talk about in a minute. But at the very beginning, right away, these two amazing verses are totally ruined by this one word right at the beginning: religion. Because I don't know what that word means, right? That's a hard word. It has all kinds of weird baggage now. It's really heavy and confusing. It's not clear. None of you want to be described as religious, right? That's not a thing for us. It's a difficult thing. So I looked up the word. It's this word called threskia, and there is good news in the definition of the word because it means the outward expression of what we believe. So all of a sudden it makes more sense. All of a sudden this passage is saying, those who consider themselves, those who want it to be obvious to people that the word of Jesus is alive in them, need to do the following things. And then this passage makes a lot more sense. It means that the ultimate expression of us allowing the word that's in us to save us is not in ritual or ceremony or liturgy. It's that the best ritual and liturgy and ceremony that we can offer to God is taking care of the people around us that need taken care of and keeping ourselves from getting caught up in all the bad. You guys know, students, you guys know, we talk about this all the time. We talk about how when you walk into your school, when you're with your group of friends, even the people that you're closest to right away, there's people pulling you in ways you don't want to go. You guys, a lot of you probably feel this at work. You feel right away like you've left the place where everything's under your control, and now you're put in weird positions constantly, and you have to constantly decide how it is that you can best represent your faith in that situation. It starts to get a lot messier. And that's why it's so important for us to keep meeting, because it's our job as a church to make sure that none of us let our faith become just about being here on Sundays, but that we expand that really big and try and find new ways all the time to be supporting each other in the love that we have for the people all around us. Because the thing that says in that passage in Matthew chapter 13 about the word of God being sown into the hearts of people, it says that if it lands in dead hearts or hearts that aren't ready for it or hearts that are too crowded for it, nothing happens. But if it lands in a heart that's ready, if the word of Jesus lands in a heart that's open to it, good soil, it says that it produces 30, 60, or 100 times what was sown. It's saying that not only can it save you, but it can save all the people around you that you love. That's why Jesus died, to save so many people. And now our job, now the thing that we get to do is always be doing that as well. So we need to be constantly looking for the people around us who need to be shown God's love. And then go lay our lives down for them in some way that they can realize that the word's been in them the whole time, so that the word can save them. You get that? Like, there's going to be this point for everybody. We talk about this all the time, you guys. You know this. There's this part in Philippians chapter 2 where it says, one day everyone's going to be on their knees before Jesus, whether they wanted to or they were surprised by it or they got forced to it or they desired it more than anything. Everybody's going to be there. Everybody someday is going to realize that there's been a little bit of Jesus growing in them the whole time. And we don't want it to be too late. We want to help them understand it now, because once they understand it, then they can finally begin to truly live. Part of growing up is at all its different phases, right? We're all still growing up. We're still learning new things all the time. We're still getting challenged in new ways all the time. Part of doing that is trying to figure out what it is that we're supposed to do, where Jesus wants us to be, where God's calling us to, where's that righteous living that he wants us to be. And for me, I loved that when I was at my college, there was this building where we would go to for all kinds of random stuff, and it had, one of the things it had in there was like career services, and you'd go there for like all kinds of academic counseling and activities and things like that. And it had out front of it, it had this really killer verse on a sign, a big sign right out front, Micah 6:8. You guys know Micah 6:8? It's a really simple expression of what James is trying to say. It says, he has shown you, oh man, what is good and what does the Lord require of you? That's what we want to know. Micah is saying here, you've already been told. You know from the prophets, you know from the story of God what it is that you're supposed to know. Here's what it is: to act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. That's not quite as spelled out as we wish it was. It needs a little more skin and bones on it, but for me that was always really affirming. I liked that was there. It had underneath it, it had the year the school was founded, and I always really liked it. And I thought of that sign recently because I went to Seattle Pacific University, and it was only about 600 yards away from where that sign is that a sad, confused, and angry guy walked into the science building with the intent of shooting a bunch of people. And there was a guy there. There was this kid there who was about to get married. And in that moment, he decided that acting justly right then would mean using that pepper spray that he always carried around with him. He decided that loving mercy meant right then that if he had to die to help everybody else live, that he would be fine to do that. And it also meant that even shortly after the thing happened, that right then he was not describing the guy who came in with a gun and messed up all these people's lives as a murderer or a monster. He was describing him as sick and confused and disturbed. In that moment, this kid decided that sometimes walking humbly with God isn't clear, it's not obvious, but we remember a couple things. We remember that we're His. We remember that we have His word in us. And we remember that our faith doesn't only happen on Sunday mornings or in the way that we expect. So God, help us please to go out this week with patient ears and a slow mouth and a filter against anger that gets stronger every day. Help us to take the stuff off that separates us from you. Help us to get the wax out of our ears so we can hear you calling us to life. Give us the courage to show all the people around us who don't know that you're already in them or that you're trying to get into them what it would be like. Help them to see, help us to show them that the choice is not between convenience and inconvenience or between action and laziness. The choice is between life and death. The choice is between living for you and living for us. The choice is between ending up where you want us to be in your promised land or not ever getting there because we chose our own way instead. Help us to find new ways to put a smile on your face this week and to show the people around us how much you love us and how much we love them. Thanks so much for your love. In your name we pray. Amen.